Hello, I am Vedran Sulovsky, and I will be presenting Church Topography and Liturgy, the example of Aachen's Barbarossaleuchter. So, you will be able to find my previous lecture, Visualizing Saint Charlemagne, online as well. Today's lecture will be similar to that one in terms of material, and some of the background will have to be covered here again, so that no one has to view the same lecture twice, or at least parts. So once again, where is this taking place? It's the 12th century in the Holy Roman Empire, which you can now see on the map in one of Europe's most bizarre maps. The protagonist is Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, who reigned from 1152 to 1190. Though the protagonist of this particular presentation will be an object, a chandelier. The location is here in Aachen, so now this is at the border between Germany, Belgium and the Netherlands, so still in Germany, but just there. And we now have to see why this Aachen is important and how does it get to be very important in the 12th century. So here we can see the expansion of the realm of the Franks all the way up to Charlemagne. So this border shows Charlemagne's domains at the end of his life. And Aachen is located here. So it's in the core region of the Frankish kingdom, or kingdoms, and later on it becomes the core region of the Frankish Empire under Charlemagne. It then, however, undergoes a tumultuous time, so it goes through several difficult phases where it switches allegiance between the West Franks and the East Franks, so the French and the Germans. And it also has periods that it belongs to Lotharingia, so this middle region, which used to be independent or semi-independent, before eventually becoming part of the German kingdom in the early 10th century, which then became the Holy Roman Empire, which many are familiar with. Now Aachen is then still located within the Duchy of Lower Lotharingia, so Lotharingia or Lower Lotharingia over here. And this is very important because Aachen always retains some local or regional traditions which the rest of the kingdom or kingdoms surrounding it might not follow. So this is the church as seen from the north. So this is the West Tower, renovated in the 19th century, as many things in Europe, but also in Aachen. This is the central octagon, and here the hexadecagonal outside part, so the ambulatory. This is Carolingian original. This has been redone in the 12th century, so the dome, and the choir is 14th, 15th century, as are the outside chapels. Now, Aachen is important for many reasons, and one of them is Charlemagne's palace. Now, in the late 8th century, Charlemagne ruled 768 to 814, king of the Franks, and later also king of the Langobards and emperor of the Romans, completely reconstructed the royal imperial palace in Aachen. Now, while Frankish kings had many palaces, Aachen is particularly important because Charlemagne began living there permanently. So, as opposed to previous kings who just traveled from one place to another, being hosted by bishops or great lords. Here we see what Aachen looks like today. This is its floor plan. So this would be the original part, so the Carolingian part, even with later reconstructions. The Carolingian part would finish here, so with an apse, which has since been lost and replaced with the larger 15th century choir, some side chapels, and this is where the tower would be. As you can see, the two staircases. The original floor plan looked much like this, so this would be north, this would be south. So the palace would be over here. There would be a corridor connecting it with the church complex. There would be an atrium, so a court or a court with porticos outside them, surrounding it. Then the church in a roughly circular building which had an eastern apse, which also had two annex buildings, which are not churches, unlike what I said in the previous lecture. Their functions are not exactly known, and that is a problem. Now, Charlemagne's palace is so important and is always referred to as Charlemagne's because his son, so Louis the Pious, 814 to 840 as ruler, or independent ruler, continued living there until 829, when the system of government envisioned by Charlemagne effectively collapsed, and Louis had to become an itinerant king once again. However, the golden age of Aachen, which lasted about 30 years, was never forgotten either by the Frankish kings nor the locals. So a lot of local tradition depends on it, and also royal and imperial tradition. Now, Charlemagne and Louis the Pious created the huge Palatine complex with a Palatine building, which is also connected to the Marienkirche, so the Church of St. Mary, the main church, by means of a two-story corridor. Around the complex there were residences of important state officials, so dukes, counts, archbishops, bishops, abbots. The church remains, but there were two other annex buildings whose purpose is unknown, and it dates to around 796 and is the best preserved Carolingian church, mainly due to how posterity treated Charlemagne's church with a rare reverence. So it really is important that this was his church, because other churches from the same period were rebuilt, whereas this one was preserved precisely because it was his and this was his design. Today it looks like this, so this is a late 19th, early 20th century reconstruction. We see the dome, which more or less fits the original iconography, so the 24 elders of the Apocalypse surrounding God, the old ruler, on his throne, and the four apocalyptic beasts which represent the evangelists. This part, called a tambour, is not exactly, or does not follow at all, what we know about the medieval program, so this can be safely ignored. And the same applies to these beautiful mosaics you can see here, so not everything is exactly as as a historian or art historian would want to have it. So what one needs to know is that most of its architecture, so of this church, has been preserved, but its original decoration has been lost. The Carolingian atrium was later then transformed into a set of extraneous chapels. The Carolingian mosaics disappeared in the 17th to 19th centuries, but were then reconstructed vigorously and sometimes with less care to detail than one would hope for. This is what the church looks like from the west, so from the atrium. And another thing, the church has kept a lot of liturgical equipment, so but these are from the 10th to 12th centuries, so the original one has completely gone missing. So these are manuscripts, crosses, textiles, vases, and so on. And then, of course, the Carolingian sanctuary was replaced by a huge Gothic choir. So once again, this is the building. So we now know roughly what happened to the building itself. There is also the question of Charlemagne's tomb. I will leave this part up so you can read it at your own leisure, but we will not be discussing the tomb very much. Charlemagne was buried in Aachen when he died in 814. The tomb's location is disputed by scholars, as is its appearance. We know it's somewhere in the center of the church and that it contained an image of Charlemagne seated, but that's about it. Scholars think that this was his original sarcophagus, and that this is what the tomb looked like. It should have been located in the southeastern bay of the ground floor. We will not go into detail, but that would be about here. We will not have time to see why this is relevant for the Barbarossaleuchter, though there are, let's say, references to it. So, Aachen was also the seat of the imperial throne, and from 936 kings of Germany were crowned at the Marienkirche's main altar, and then led to Charlemagne's throne on the upper floor. So whereas the altar would be in the east ground floor, the Charlemagne's throne would be on the first floor to the west. and it is not clear what happened to Charlemagne's tomb in this time either. It then reappears in sources in the year 1000, but is not referred to for 200 years. So there are a lot of objects which we know about, but we are not exactly sure when they are here and who put them there, and whether they're actually what legend would have them to be. This is what Charlemagne would see from his throne, so the dome. This part, however, would actually preclude him from seeing the all-ruler enthroned. Sorry. We also know that Charlemagne became a saint at some point. This is relatively gradual. We know that his tomb is already opened in the year 1000 by Otto III, and he finally becomes a saint on 29 December 1165 when Frederick Barbarossa elevates him and has him canonized on the authority of Antipope Pascal III. This should be 68. Now we have to see the program as it occurs and just before the object we will be considering today is made, that is the Barbarossaleuchter. So in 1165, Frederick Barbarossa most likely donated a brachiary with images of Mary, Christ, Saints Peter and Paul, and the imperial family so that the canons of Aachen would pray for them. And on Easter 1174, Barbarossa, his wife Beatrix of Burgundy, and his son Henry VI, so future emperor, solemnly wear crown as the crown chandelier Frederick commissioned is inaugurated. This is the brachiary, so Mary, two angels, Frederick Barbarossa, and Beatrix of Burgundy. When it's open, it actually tells you that you can see the arm of the glorious Emperor Charles. The object we will be dealing with today, however, is the Barbarossaleuchter. This is what it looks like. So it is roughly octagonal. So it is octagonal, but each of its sides is a lobe, or a part of a lobe, if you would. And these sides are always demarked by small towers connecting them, and each side has in its center a larger tower. So as you can see here, we will go into a few more details later on. So it's located over here, so right in the center, and you can immediately see that there is an octagon here and there is an octagon here. You can also note that there is a hexadecagon outside and there are 16 towers, so you have references to the basic numerological system which is present in the church from the beginning. It is also well known that the imperial crown of the Holy Roman Empire, which dates to the 10th or 11th century, was also octagonal and considered a symbol of the empire, though it was not the only official crown, it was not always even necessary for an emperor to have it. Now, a great scholar, Ernst Günther Grimme, proposed this reconstruction, that the Karlshrine, a reliquary shrine that bore the body of Charlemagne, now a saint, was put beneath the Barbarossa chandelier in 1215, so as to show that Charlemagne had become holy and he was entering heaven. And he also postulated that the chandelier only made sense when the emperor would come beneath it, so as to fill it up like this, as is shown on Frederick Barbarossa's golden bull, and thus he would, as the city shown here is Rome, thus Grimme proposed that the chandelier meant Rome, and that the emperor's presence beneath it made Aachen into Rome. Now, these are some obscure theories outside of the field, but they are quite mainstream within it. And here we can see what Aachen looks like on a plan. So on a side plan, this is drawn by Buchkremer and then by Ciresi. So we can see that the emperor, the throne's point of view is such that he can always see all the altars, or at least one of the altars, the main altars, and that he can see a lot over here, and also the chandelier. So the chandelier is permanently in view. It functions like this. So the chandelier would be hereabouts, so you can see it today from above when you visit. Once again, this is his view on the throne. And now we discuss the Barbarossaleuchter's position. So until now, scholars did not have many theories on it. There was the imperialist theory, so the one which has it as a huge hanging crown for Saint Charlemagne, who's entering heaven. And there is another opinion, which has been much less propagated, and much fewer articles and books were published favoring it, and that is that it is a pious object. So we will just discuss the very basics. So previously scholars thought that the Barbarossaleuchter was hanged right above the brachiary of Saint Charlemagne, so which was created 9 years earlier, and that this was later replaced by the Karlshrine. However, it turns out that the brachiary and the Karlshrine were located slightly more to the east, so that candlelight could fall on both their locations and also on the main altar of St. Mary. However, they were not beneath the chandelier as postulated by Grimme. This means that the whole idea of Charlemagne entering into heaven like this was not even a possibility. Now, what we do know about the chandelier is that it contains 80 images of saints, who were then further classified into prophets, apostles, martyrs, confessors, and virgins. There are, however, to point out, 88 images in total, and it's not 80 images of saints, it's 64 images of saints, 8 images of the beatitudes, and 8 images of the cycle of Christ's life. The final 8 which were not mentioned here are just ornamental. Now, these categories of saints are an allusion to the saints in Charlemagne's relic collection, which was located in the Marienaltar's reliquary shrine, so to the east of the center of the shrine, the center of the church, and which was replaced by the Marian shrine, so the reliquary shrine of St. Mary, in the 1230s. Now, the Barbarossaleuchter was a liturgical device used for lighting on the holidays of all of Aachen's major saints and on the major Christological holidays, so Easter or Christmas or Pentecost. However, the Barbarossaleuchter would also be a reminder for the canons to pray for Barbarossa and his wife Beatrix, who are mentioned on the chandelier's inscription, but also for and to Charlemagne, perhaps, who brought the relics to Aachen. So thus Barbarossa is related to the man who brought the relics. Now, previously scholars thought that the dating was anywhere between 1156, when Frederick and Beatrix, both of whose names appear on the chandelier, married, and Beatrix's death in 1184. Stylistically, the chandelier should date between the late 1160s and about 1180, but is most similar to objects from the early 70s. So we already have an idea. Now, what do the sources say on all of this? So it would be strange for an object so obviously commissioned by the emperor and empress to be presented to the church without any pomp, so I searched through the imperial couple's visits to find a suitable occasion, and 2 occasions seemed particularly likely. So the coronation of Henry VI on 15 August 1169, during which, however, the mother and the father were not present, and the festive crown-wearing by the whole imperial family on Easter 1174. The Annals of Aachen, a local chronicle, or annals, better said, mention both occasions, but particularly highlight the visit of 1174, during which even the emissaries of Sultan Saladin visited, among others. Now, this was an important detail that was deliberately written into the narrative so as to make the parallel obvious, the parallel between the present and the past obvious when Charlemagne had emissaries of the Caliph bring him gifts to Aachen. So This is famously the elephant that the Jew Isaac brought back from Harun al-Rashid, often erroneously called Charlemagne's white elephant. Now, another clue pointing to 1174 is the special form of dating used for the year. Namely, besides the typical Anno Domini, so year of our Lord, the author also included the Anno Mundi, year of the world, which was 6400 in 1174. So essentially it was 6400. This is quite a steep date, but bear with me. Now, as the Barbarossaleuchter's inscription clearly calls upon the reader to take into account its form and number, and its octagonal shape reflects the church's shape and number, we can see that this number is not just a curiosity. The simplest solution is to notice that 64, the number used for the symbolic date of 6400 Anno Mundi, is the sum of 8 times 8, that is 8 squared. Then, moreover, the number 6400 is 80 squared, so the number of the full reliefs on the Barbarossaleuchter, so excluding the 8 ornamental ones. So now we see that all of the numbers, all of the numerological references are interlinked. So suddenly we realize that there is much more to this chandelier than previously thought. Additionally, the Carolingian phase in Aachen is known for its numerical symbolism based on the numbers 8 and 10 as well. So one would easily get 6400. Thus, it will not be strange for a knowledgeable Aquensian to refer to these numbers when explicitly invoking Charlemagne or his gift of the saint's relics. Now, since the Annals of Aachen, written about 1175, follow the same numerological system as the Barbarossaleuchter, the dating is even more certain. So we can even see that these are contemporaries and they know what they are saying. Moreover, one can also see that the church follows a similar pattern. There are 64 openings in the octagon, for example, 8 in the ground floor arches, 48 in the first floor's arches, and 8 in the tambour windows. This is similar to the 64 lost saints' reliefs on the chandelier. Now, whereas one can never be exactly certain of this kind of numerological frame of reference, it is obvious that the numbers keep repeating themselves, and they seem to be always based on the same numbers. Whether we have the exact same reference as they thought they had, this we can never know because we do not have a text saying so. However, one can make educated guesses. Now, the chandelier is specific in that it belongs to a type of object described by Honorius Augustodunensis and Sicard of Cremona, 12th and early 13th century writers. Now, their descriptions vary, but they agree that the various materials used for making such chandeliers, so gold, silver, bronze, iron, etc., reflect the orders of saints, who are martyrs, virgins, confessors, the chaste, etc. So here we realize that nothing is casual. There is the chandelier is gilded, therefore gold is present. There are iron chains, and that is present as well. We know that the reliefs were made of silver, so that is present as well. And bronze is, or copper sometimes, the two authors differ, is present in that is the main material which is used and then was gilded. So everything is planned in detail. Now, Aachen's relic lists and one of Barbarossa's charters for Aachen mentions only martyrs, virgins, and confessors, so these are the categories of saints present in Aachen. So these are definitely present, so martyrs, virgins, confessors. And even though we have a relic list from the 1170s and another from the 1230s, their saints are unfortunately incompatible with the chandelier reliefs, as too many of them are listed. So we cannot say, oh, these saints are on the list, therefore these are the saints who are on the chandelier. The relics, we do not know who they actually were. This is a problem because the saints' reliefs have actually been lost. However, the 1170s relic list is a crucial piece of evidence as it demonstrates that the canons of Aachen were reworking their liturgy of saints at the time. This was necessary because one of their favorite patrons had suddenly become a saint, and that is Charlemagne. So suddenly a big part of their liturgy, which was the commemorative service for Charlemagne, their founder, had become obsolete, and they had to change it for the cult of Saint Charlemagne. Thus, even though the Emperor and Empress commissioned the chandelier, which was used for important liturgical feasts, the gift was tailored to the needs of the community. So we have the chandelier, which might be an imperial monument, so used for the aggrandizement of Frederick Barbarossa's visit, and his son and his wife's and his son's visit as well. The chandelier, in fact, was used by the locals, and it helped make their feasts even better. Now, the chandelier's reliefs can be divided into three groups. 8 small ornamental reliefs on the top of the most ornate towers, 16 reliefs on the bottom of the 16 towers, which alternately depict the life of Christ and the 8 beatitudes. So these are from the Sermon on the Mount in the Gospel of Matthew. And there are 64 reliefs on the tower's lateral sides, and these were probably saints' reliefs. Now, the lost reliefs can be partially reconstructed with the help of the 1170s list, but only because we have 3 other crown chandeliers and know many others to have depicted the saints as the inhabitants of heavenly Jerusalem. A 16th century etching depicts soldiers on the reliefs, but as the other details are mistaken, so number of towers, it is hard to take this image seriously. The inscription mentions patriarchs, apostles, and prophets, and the relic lists in Barbarossa's charter mention martyrs, virgins, and confessors, so it is likely that these 5 groups peopled the reliefs. These must have been grouped in some way and have reflected a division between the categories, but as they were lost in the 18th century, we know nothing more about them. And there seems to be no source which mentions them either. Now, the Christological cycle is a curious one. It has 8 parts, so the Annunciation, the Nativity, the Adoration of the Magi, the Crucifixion, the 3 Marys at the empty tomb, the Ascension, Pentecost, and Christ in Majesty. The Beatitudes are even stranger. You will immediately see that the 3rd Beatitude comes second, and the 2nd comes 3rd. That is very strange. So we have them, and we also have their inscriptions. We will not have time to debate or discuss the references in the Beatitudes and the Christological cycle, but suffice to say that these 2 were used in creating the topography of Aachen. So these are the strange things with the program, and that is that the 2nd and 3rd Beatitudes have traded places, like in Origen's Bible, the Syriac Bible, or a work of St. Clement, and that the earthly life of Christ is very compressed. So there are only 4 parts of the cycle where he is alive, and 4 when he is already dead and then resurrected, which is very atypical. Usually one gets more of the life of Christ when he is alive. Now, the Barbarossaleuchter can only be explained if its inscriptions are understood well, and so we have to begin with the 2 inscriptions on it. The upper inscription, that is about the heavenly city of Jerusalem that St. John the Evangelist saw in a vision, so this is the Book of Revelations, or the Apocalypse. And then there is the lower inscription, which is about Frederick Barbarossa's and Beatrix's donation of the crown of chandelier. The 2 inscriptions are relevant not only because of the facts that they recount, but also because they tell the viewer to pay attention to the number and form of the chandelier. So as I noted earlier, this is very crucial. They are telling us something about the symbolism. There is another hint in the sources. The necrology, which is a genre of work, which names all the donators and founders and important people for whom a church has to pray, calls the chandelier corona, crown, which is the same as how Einhard's Vita Caroli Magni, so biography of Charlemagne, calls the frieze just below the first floor. And this is just around the chandelier. So there is a crown which is reflecting Charlemagne's crown. So there are references here that need to be taken seriously. Now this frieze once contained Charlemagne's dedicatory inscription, which was a poem by Alcuin that emphasized the numerological symbolism of the building. Once again, the symbolism is explicit. Where Alcuin's inscription, however, only mentions even or equal numbers, Barbarossa's lower inscription mentions Frederick, whose gifts make the clergy pay attention to the temple's model in number and form of this octagonal gift of a royal crown. So Frederick Barbarossa also calls the crown chandelier a royal crown, and he explicitly states that the number and form are imitated, so that the temple being the church, is imitated through the chandelier. So none of the symbolism seems to be accidental. Now Barbarossa's inscription tells us who the audience is, and that is the clergy, who have to pay attention to the form and number of the crown. However, there are numerous other references in the two inscriptions. The upper inscription begins by referencing heavenly Jerusalem and the vision of peace on the two easternmost parts of the frieze. This was towards the sanctuary, where it was normally only the canons who could stay there for a prolonged period of time. So clearly they were the audience of this part. It would also be the king who was crowned there. Now the word spes, hope, is also interesting here. It appears in the inscription, as it appears opposite not only the Marian altar on the ground floor, but also the upper floor Salvator altar, so altar of Christ, which also contained the relics of Saint Speus, hope. One could say, okay, lucky accident. The third verse, however, which mentions Saint John the Evangelist, is on the eastern of the two southern parts of the frieze, near the location of the altar of Saint John the Evangelist on the western of the two southern pylons. Okay, another happy occurrence, one could say. The fifth verse, however, mentions the Apostolical light on the southern of the two western parts of the frieze. This is opposite the later altar of Saint Simon and Jude, but also where a charter of 1207 mentions that these relics, the relics of these two apostles, could be found within the columns, supposedly since the time of Charlemagne. Okay, the number of interesting references is starting to rise. Now the city descending from the skies, which the sixth verse mentions, appears on the northern of the westward-looking friezes, which is where both the emperor on his throne in the western bay, but also the lay people, both of whom would enter the church from the northwest, would be able to read it. This was not by chance. The inscription thus mentioned heavenly Jerusalem, the key concept of the chandelier, on parts facing the clergy and the laity, so all of the audience. No clear reason appears for the Virgin Mary to be mentioned in the northern side of the chandelier, unless one considers that she, in the north, and John the Evangelist, in the south, were now flanking the image of Christ in majesty, who could be found in a dome, which is the center, but also the Salvator altar, so by this time known as the altar of the Holy Cross, which was on the eastern gallery of the Marienkirche. Now in both cases Mary and John would have been next to, but also beneath the cross, just as was typical for the iconography of the crucifixion. At this point one begins to wonder what was going on in Aachen and who was making this program and why. Now the lower inscription is less biblical and speaks more clearly about the donors and their gift. The first verse mentions Emperor Frederick, and the second already tells the clergy to pay attention to the numerological structure of the object. These two verses faced eastwards, so towards the sanctuary, where the clergy were reminded of their patron but also his intentions. This will also be the place where the crowned king would be able to see Frederick Barbarossa's name as one of his predecessors. The two southern verses, so 3 and 4, mention the Marienkirches and the Barbarossaleuchter's octagonal form. If it is true that Alcuin's inscription began on the southeastern arch, which seems very likely, then its second verse, which mentions even or equal numbers, would have faced these verses mentioning the octagonal crown, thus inviting a comparison between the two. So not only do we know that there is Frederick Barbarossa's corona surrounded by Charlemagne's corona, their inscriptions are also mimicking one another. So that is, Frederick Barbarossa's inscription is mimicking the earlier one. Now, the Western verses, 5 to 6, refer to Frederick's vow to the Virgin Mary and address her directly. These verses face the imperial throne in the Western Gallery, showing Frederick's and the Virgin's name to the Emperor and his entourage. They also hover above the church's main entrance, which pilgrims would have used. Thus, the Eastern verses declared Frederick the patron of the work to the clergy, and the Western ones did the same to the imperial court and pilgrims. Finally, the Northern verses, 7 and 8, ask that the Virgin pray for Frederick and his wife Beatrix. These verses, together with verse 6, in which the invocation of the Virgin begins, and which was facing the lay people's entrance, were meant for the eyes of the laity. These will also, of course, be seen by the canons, whose particular chapel was also located to the northwest. Now, to summarize, the many parallels between the Barbarossaleuchter on the one hand and the Marienkirche's layout on the other hand convincingly shows that the object was planned with great care and attention to detail, both artistically and politically. Each member of the audience was addressed in one way or another. The clergy of Aachen, the imperial court, the laity of Aachen, the itinerant pilgrims. So everybody was addressed. The relevant altars were also referred to. Those of Christ the Saviour, the Holy Cross, which are the same altar in different periods apparently, the Virgin Mary, and of John the Evangelist. The imperial throne and the closely related relics of Saint Simon and Jude were also used as a part of the intricate spatial plan of the chandelier. Furthermore, the chandelier's inscriptions were divided by a lost band, discussed above, similarly to how the Carolingian corona, so inscription frieze, divided the two floors of the church, or how the Etonian situla's floor were divided by a jeweled band. So this is an object roughly this size, which also shows two floors, and once again it's octagonal and is in Aachen and used only in Aachen. Its exact purpose and occasion of donation are unknown. Now, clearly, an object as complex as the Barbarossaleuchter cannot be an accidental creation by an artist, entirely unheeded by the needs of the local community or the desires of the patron. The chandelier not only reflects the Marienkirche's topography, but it adds to it by symbolically linking its parts to different audiences, sometimes even repeating its message to them separately. To conclude, finally, the majority of the references that I found could not even be mentioned in this talk, as the chandelier's program turned out to be much more complex and rigorously referential than anybody had ever postulated. These include visual, textual, topographical, liturgical, and spatial references. And all in all, it seems that the Barbarossaleuchter, which has been neglected by scholars working on Aachen in the past 60 years, contains the Hohenstaufen-era plan for Aachen's Marienkirche. Thus, whereas the Sacrum Imperium program that depicted the sanctity of Charlemagne was believed in since the 1950s, it turns out that something much more complex was being created, and it has passed unnoticed by scholars for so long. That is also one of the main problems of objects such as the Barbarossaleuchter and churches such as Aachen, where one expects everything to be imperial and one wants everything to be Charlemagne, so that very often very easy to spot local references are ignored, and sources also find no reception among scholars. And that would be all for today. I hope that I've shown that there is something more to the chandelier. One could add much more about it, but it would be hard to explain any particular reference without going through the entire cycle, which is why we will stop here, and you will hopefully, some of you might read the continuation in my upcoming work. Thank you very much, and goodbye.